Yeah, feel free to get situated and I'll kind of get us rolling with some introductory context for people who may be new today.
Sounds good.
So thank you all for being here for our next edition of Glass Reflections. These are a series of conversations meant to exchange ideas, create resources, and help build a resilient glass community. My name is Jenna. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Operations and Programs Manager for the Glass Art Society. I'm coming to you live from Phoenix, Arizona, so a slight change there, which is fun. And I'm thrilled to continue hosting these monthly conversations geared towards cultivating sustainable art careers. Every first Thursday, I go live and interview glass artists such as Jeff, businesses, or educators about how they explore glass, both creating and or viewing, as a vehicle for self-care. And we will shed light on the resiliency of glass artists. So with that being said, I'm very excited today to talk to not only a glass artist, but also a licensed family therapist and social worker, Jeff Newman. And to give a little bit of a backstory for people who maybe aren't as aware of who you are and the work you do, Jeff has been an advocate for increasing accessibility to the glass arts for over a decade and explores the relationship glass can have in connecting and healing. Based in New York City, Jeff most recently had his first solo exhibit at the ESP Gallery in Chelsea, New York, in October of 2019. So welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you for that introduction. I'm excited to be here. I'd say I'm slightly a bit nervous, but very excited to engage in this conversation.
Same feelings. And I love how you name that. I'm getting used to myself naming when I feel nervous or anxious. So you're not alone. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, actually. Thank you. Yourself?
I'm doing well. Yeah, the sun is shining, so I'm enjoying that little change of weather from Seattle to Phoenix. So I'm doing well.
We are in our last days of winter here in New York, heading into the spring, so it's still got a nice little brisk in the air.
Lovely. The shift in the seasons is always kind of a nice special time.
Very much so.
Is there anything else you would like to share maybe about your background or you yourself as a human individual?
I think it's really important for me as a maker and as a glass maker, a glass artist, an artist of any point to, I think, just identify how central my relationship with glass has been to my own well-being. I like to say that glass saved my life. And I look back to my late teens and early 20s, very lost in the world, not knowing a direction. And all of a sudden, I mean, if you had asked me, working with glass was the farthest thing from my mind. But all of a sudden, I found myself engulfed in a community in Boulder, Colorado. And watching other makers and the free flow of information. And all of a sudden, I'm working in a studio 16, 17 hours a day, sleeping in the studio when I'm feeling depressed, sad, not knowing what direction to go in. I know that if I step in that studio and I push through an 8-hour shift, first 2 hours may be rough, 3 or 4 hours, mood starts to lift, 5 or 6 hours. I'm feeling the beat of the music while I'm working, 7 to 8 hours. Now I'm kind of dancing while I'm working. And I know that through my time working with glass, my relationship with it, I transform emotions within myself. And it's an alchemical process. It's similar working with glass, same thing. We transform glass. So I very quickly learned that if I were just to kick myself in the butt and get in the studio, I could transform my inner world as well as transform something physical in the outer world.
That's fascinating. And I would love to hear, so you said you had started in the studio in Boulder, Colorado?
Mm-hmm.
What studio was that? And what kind of like, what was your role there? Like, how did you even become aware of that
That,
studio?
that's so great. It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I was I was 20 years old. I moved to Boulder, Colorado with my girlfriend. We were sitting on the corner. We had just been there maybe 3 or 4 days. And we're sitting on the corner, like sidewalk area, eating a burrito. And I see an old friend walk by. So I scream out his name and he says, "Hey, Jeff," and we talk for a little bit and he invites me over to meet some of his friends at a bar. So I walked into the bar and lo and behold, I had known several of the people there. So I walked in and realized, oh, I kind of already have a crew of people here.
Mm-hmm.
And I overheard one of the men, his name is, and let me shout him out right now. His name is Steve Harrington. Many people may not know of him, but he is one of the most influential glass blowers to me and has been central and is one of the most skilled glass blowers I know that's kind of unknown. And I heard him offer the opportunity to work with glass to somebody else, to be an apprentice. So after a few weeks, I knew this person didn't call Harry to say, "Hey, I want to work with glass." So I thought, let me give it a shot. I called Harry and he said, "Yeah, come on up, hang out in my studio. We'll make a marble." So I'm now 20 years old, moving from Albany, New York to Boulder, Colorado. I'm driving up the mountains to 20,000 feet to his studio. I'm kind of like, I'm out of my element. I walk into the studio, I spend the day with him, and I think, okay, I think I could do this. And let me point out, too, there's another central piece to this, and I think it's quite comical. And I don't know if other makers or artists or other people have had this experience, but I moved to Colorado with my girlfriend at the time, and we had broken up about 3 months into me being in Colorado. So I have to say that part of my motivation to get into glass was to impress an ex-girlfriend.
The plot thickens. I love hearing everyone's stories. It's so just wide. It's such a spectrum of how people get introduced to glass because it's such a unique medium, and it's, in my opinion, so different than other mediums that artists might more easily fall into, such as paint or, et cetera, et cetera. So I love hearing people's introductory to glass.
Very much so. Very much so. And I think that leads into one of the points that I think is really important to hit on, which is accessibility to glass.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
to have the privilege, to have the privilege to be exposed to it, to be in a community or have the money to buy the torch, have the money to buy the very expensive glass that it is, to pay rent on a studio. And so it leads into how inaccessible glass can be for many people, especially individuals, which is one of my passions and working with, and say, I don't know, we use these terms, underserved, underprivileged communities. These are communities primarily of black and brown, and they don't have accessibility. And one of my main thoughts about that when I started to ponder this in 2014, after I went to the Chicago Gas Conference, and I walked into the hall where they were having the keynote speaker. The name was Theaster Gates that year. And I walked in and I was really shocked that it was 95% Caucasian. And so I started to really think about, what is this? And one of the big ideas that came is that maybe it's possible that there never was the establishment of a first generation of glass blowers within these communities. So there are no elders. There are no There are no people blowing glass that 14-year-old, 20-year-old individuals can look at and say, hey, that guy looks like me and he's doing that. You know, I could do that. Maybe he can help me. You know, there aren't these places within these communities. There aren't the studios. There aren't the glass makers. There aren't the elders that hold the information to pass down to the next generation. They haven't been established. And that's one of my goals in my work here in New York City, in my coalitions and several partnerships with some nonprofits, is to increase this accessibility to the glass, because I know what it did for me. It saved my life. If it saved my life, it can save so many others. And its connection to mental and physical health and well-being and self-esteem and creativity and understanding how if I take this, I take that, I come up with this. This is the key to empowerment. This is understanding our own power about how we create our lives. And within glass, I think glass is really special in that way, because it's so demanding of our attention in that moment that it's almost a really present, focused, meditative practice that while you're doing it, I didn't even know it, but while I was doing it, I was developing these powerful critical thinking skills, like thinking on my feet, understand, you know, time management, all these different critical thinking skills that get in the way, that have been proven to be the Achilles heel to a lot of the problems that we see in individuals being unable to take that next step in empowerment in their own lives, which is the ability to critically think, to be in the moment, to assess what's happening, to make a choice, to see if it failed, if it went forward, and to learn that whole process.
So before because I definitely want to hear more about these partnerships and the coalitions that you're involved with in New York, but before we get there, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your practice specifically. So within the glass community, you know, there are different kind of directions or, you know, focuses, if you want, that you could kind of fall into. So could you explain a bit more about what type of glass artwork you make and what techniques you might use?
Absolutely. I'm a lamp worker, or a flame worker, they would call it. So I work with hard glass. And I first got into glass, obviously, in 2000. And I was brought into the pipe movement in the early, I'd say, you know, the semi-early stages of the pipe movement. And the energy, and that allowed us for a lot of experimentation. And after a few years just working with glass, about 5 years, I decided I felt a little constricted in what I was doing. I felt like I was stuck in a bubble. You know, I would go to the studio, I would come home, go to the studio, come home. The people I was interacting with, it was all the same thing, you know? And I knew in myself there was a different kind of passion that wanted to reach out more into other areas of the world, to be connected to the world. So I went and I got a graduate degree. I enrolled in school. They accepted me, to my astonishment, honestly, because I graduated from my bachelor's degree with a 2.7. So I was stunned that they accepted me, first of all.
What grad program did you go to?
I did the University of Phoenix in Phoenix, Arizona, and I did their marriage and family therapy program. And so it was a 2-year program. It was very intense. And so I decided to go into this program. So I took many years off from working with glass. But while I was in this graduate program, I was studying substance abuse. And this leads into my work. So I was studying substance abuse, and we were studying how chemicals and neurotransmitters transmit energy from neurons to neurons, and how these connections happen within our body, and how the energy is transferred through our neurons. And I
Mm-hmm.
started to think, oh my God, this is really cool. You know, I want to sculpt a neuron when I get back to glass.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know how it happened, but I became exposed to pictures from the Hubble telescope. It was very
Mm-hmm.
new at that time in the early 2000s, these pictures from the Hubble telescope of exploding stars, of nebulas, of galaxies, these very detailed pictures. And one of the things I started to realize is that these pictures that are coming from the Hubble telescope, the shapes and are mirroring the shapes that I'm seeing as I'm studying the neurons within the human body.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to think about this connection between the micro and macro world. And so as I started to sculpt neurons, I started to realize that they also kind of look like nebulas. They also look like galaxies. They also look like neutron stars spinning around and spinning energy out. And so I got real fascinated with this connection between micro and macro. And that has been the primary direction of my work, exploring the I would say the repeating patterns that we see in our cosmos from the micro to the macro level, and how they mirror each other in form and a lot of times in function.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So then for the exhibition that you just had in 2019, could you maybe kind of, with that type of scientific connection or visual, how does that translate to maybe one of the objects that was in that show? Could you maybe visually describe taking what that big idea looks like and putting it into a glass sculpture or artwork?
Sure. So I developed my style. One of the things that I found difficult when I got into working with glass is spinning. You know, a big part of glass blowing, glass working is spinning glass, right? Spinning it, rolling it, using centrifugal force. And I found that while I would do that, I would get really dizzy. So I had to figure out a way to develop a technique or a style that I could use that wouldn't make me dizzy, but would still allow me to create what I would see, or what I felt would come out, or eventually what the piece would tell me it wanted to be. And one of those techniques was simply bending glass. I didn't have to spin it very much. I would use bends, and I would simply use heat and gravity. So a lot of my work is attempting to use the lyrical nature of bends and flows of glass, and different rhythms that can be captured within the bends and the flows of the glass that I do. So for example, my sculptures use that technique. And for example, comparing it to, say, an exploding star, when a star explodes, it sends out elements out into the universe, right? So for many of the sculptures that I had, they would have a center. Some were decentralized as well, where there was no real center, but some had centers, and they would radiate from the center outwards with these flows as if there was an explosion. And at the tips, I would use a lot of fume, gold and silver, to mirror kind of how the elements are being exploded out into the universe, like the elements that are in our body. They come from these exploding stars. And so I tried to mirror that in that way. And then I pushed myself further and further to move from a linear way of working with these bends to a non-linear and much more organic process. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating to hear glass, both as it's an art form and material, but it's still very tied to science. And before I really became a part of the Glass Art Society and the glass community, I was not aware that there was such a connection. And with chemistry and just with all of you were just explaining, it's so interesting how there is such a strong relationship between them.
So I would use these shapes, and so I would look at neurons and find a nebula that they look like, and then I would just jump into the work, and all of a sudden something would come to be, and what I thought was magnificent. And I don't know if others do, but what I think is magnificent is pictures from the Hubble telescope are actually pictures from the past, millions of years in the past, because the light has to travel millions of light years to be captured by the telescope. So what I found very deeply kind of spiritual in the work, or deeply grounding in the work, is that as I was making these sculptures, I was also kind of creating these contemporary representations or interpretations of these ancient events that happened in our cosmos millions of years ago. And it brought this different dynamic to it.
Interesting. So with that being said, I kind of want to shift gears to how, and I made a connection in my brain when you were just talking about the past, and how as part of like your introduction and part of what you're really passionate about is kind of helping bring accessibility and knowledge to more people, to kind of create that elder knowledge and passing down of information and opportunities. So could you maybe explain some of those partnerships or organizations that you work with?
Absolutely. About 5 years ago, a few friends of mine and we actually started our own not-for-profit called the Public Service Artists Guild. And we started it on our own. It's super grassroots. We are a skeleton crew. We do our best to do things, but we all live in New York City. And as we all know, the cost of living in New York City is quite high. So we eventually get pulled in different directions, and some things fall by the wayside a lot. But one of them is the Public Service Artists Guild. And we've been successful in doing some really amazing projects with the schools in New York City. For example, there's a high school that we worked with where we invited all the street artists, any street artists we can get in contact with, to come in and work with the kids and put murals on all the walls in the schools. And to this day, that school is the #1 school in the world that has the most murals and most art on the walls of it.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So that's one organization that I'm a part of, that we it's very grassroots, like I said. 4 or 5 of us taking 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, an hour there to try and do something and try and make a difference. But one of the areas that I'm super passionate about is and it's a major issue we're dealing with, is the issue of incarceration. I worked with several coalitions. One was called RAP, and I still continue. I have some contacts with them, and I maintain my contact with them because for my vision in the future, it's very important. And this coalition, RAP, get older adults.
Sorry, the sound went off for a second, but we're good now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I had a phone call that came in. I don't know how to shut that off. Okay. So one of them is called RAP, and it's Releasing Aging People from Prison. And it's based on the fact that as individuals get to be 55, 65 years old, the research shows that their desire to do any sort of criminal act plummets to the point where they're basically zero risk to our communities. And they're just hauled up in prison, and we're spending millions of dollars housing them in prison. They're suffering from medical conditions in there where they can't get the appropriate treatment, and they're being treated horribly in there. Locked up in solitary confinement for months at a time, which has been proven to cause people to become psychotic, which leads into the mental health component of my work as well. So releasing aging people from prison. And then another one is called Incarcerated Nation Network.
Okay.
And this is a great organization doing a lot of great stuff in New York. And I'm working actually very closely with them because in New York, one of the biggest things we deal with is space. Having a space to build a studio, having a space to have an office. I mean, these prices are ridiculous. And one of the things we're also, and that relates to one of the issues in the pandemic that I imagine we'll get to, is that a lot of people are leaving New York City now as well. So there's a lot of empty space happening right now. So I'm working with the Incarcerated Nation Network, releasing aging people from prison, and also the public defender's office as well. I have a friend over there looking at alternative to incarceration programs, looking at teaching. So say older individuals get released and now they have to reintegrate into the community, and they don't necessarily, maybe they've been locked up for 35 years and they don't know how to reintegrate into the community. Maybe they don't have a safe space to go to. They don't have an opportunity to produce an income because they have to check the box. So our vision, working with Incarcerated Nation, is to build a community studio in Harlem or in the South Bronx, where we can bring these individuals, teach them glass blowing skills, lamp working skills, because that's what I know, and help them to develop certain, and the thinking skills, right, with the youth as well. Let's not forget about that, and teach them how to work with glass and develop certain products and build kind of social enterprises, businesses, community organized businesses that are run by the community. So, and then marketing, building business strategies, and creating a safe space for the community to come, the youth to come, the elders to come, to learn these skills that, like I said, glass saved my life. Maybe glass can save other people's lives. And I think a relationship with glass can be so important for people. The relationship with glass, I know for me and many others that I've talked to, is so central in their life to be able to go and create, to work with fire, to have that experience, right? And then we take in all the disadvantaged pieces of it, where the lack of money, when we can build businesses, build products, market the products, and have these community-based social enterprises, which is our main goal, to get individuals who haven't had the opportunity to become self-sufficient and start to build an income.
So then before we kind of go into a Q&A and get some engagement from those in the audience, I would like a little bit of a maybe snapshot of, given the past year and COVID-19 pandemic, how has that impacted or shifted the way you've been developing this new studio and all these great programs for different age groups and getting that accessibility of glass making?
Well, one of the things is that we're highly involved in making sure that our communities get the vaccine. And we're highly involved in making sure that our communities are staying safe, especially individuals who have preconditions. And, you know, a personal note of mine regarding the pandemic is that this last year I've also had health problems. And I've been unable to work with glass. I've lost the ability right now to work with glass due to several spinal injuries and some other things. So that's why right now my biggest passion is turned towards teaching rather than producing more and more glass. My passion is turned towards trying to transfer this experience that I've had in whatever form it takes in another person's life. And in terms of the community studios, having certain guidelines, making sure that our communities are vaccinated so that when they come in, we know they're vaccinated, or we know that they've been quarantined and they've been tested, and that we always we always have access to the protective gear that we need if we need it through our connections in our organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet your teaching approach is really unique, given that you have that that licensed family therapist background and knowledge. So I'd be really curious what kind of your class
great
needs to look like.
I love that question. Because I really like talking about this. So I've been a licensed mental health professional for 12 years now. I've done a lot of work in a lot of different settings with a lot of different populations. And so some of the visions that we have as I sit together with coalition members and other members of organizations that we partner with is ideas of doing group teaching, right? We're teaching a class in class. Say we got a youth, maybe we got a group of 4 youth, right? They've been arrested. Now we have an alternative to incarceration. Our organization comes to say, hey, we got an alternative to throwing these kids in jail, throwing them in prison. It's going to do them no good. Why don't they bring them over to us, right? We'll do these group classes, and then we'll have process groups about what happened during that, right? What came up for them? What was the difficulty? Did shame come up because you couldn't do something? Because you had really like a major difficulty and maybe learning a new skill that we were teaching and somebody next to you caught on real quick and now you're feeling shame that you were unable to do that? Okay, great. Let's talk about that. What's the meaning of that? Where does that come from?
So interesting. I mean, with this specific population, I think that is such a benefit and such kind of I almost want to say radical way of engaging and teaching. And I would be so curious in how maybe more academic BFA or MFA programs, I think given the pandemic, there has been some shifts in talking about mental health and bringing that whole topic to the table when it comes to teaching students. But I'd be curious to see, in another year, how curriculum development and being an educator looks for
we're seeing a lot of movements in destigmatizing it, right? But there are also a lot of communities that have been conditioned to never reveal these things. We're all conditioned to not reveal these things. We're conditioned to push through, blow it off, right? And so the idea of a safe space, a non-judgmental place, right, with elders that look like them, that have lived their life, along with opportunities to gain, I want to say it again because this is the most important part, to gain the critical thinking skills needed to thrive in life, whether they continue with class or not. We don't care. We don't care. It's what you take from however long you stay with us into whatever arena that you go to, which those thinking skills, those critical thinking skills, right? Problem solving skills, frustration tolerance, time management. I can go on and on with critical thinking skills that we learn while we're working with class. They just tap in like that, right? We're problem solving left and right while we're working with class on our toes. Boom, boom, boom.
Very fast paced.
We have time limits on projects we have to do, right? Maybe we're renting space in a studio and we only have a certain amount of time. How do we maximize that time, right? How do we work together in a team and a collaborative process, right? So even it's not keeping them in class, it's whatever that relationship with class can be, and take that, they could take it anywhere they want and thrive.
I love that. That's fantastic.
And I thank you. I appreciate that. I want to point out too, and it's a bit of a somber note, is that we've met a lot of resistance over the years to these types of ideas. Trying to build partnerships with well-known studios in New York City. And the second you say alternative to incarceration or formerly incarcerated individuals coming home to the community, they want nothing to do with us. They want nothing. They get scared, the fear goes through the roof, they want nothing to do with us. So one of the biggest things that we're dealing with is dealing with that stigma. We're talking about stigmas of mental health, the stigma of incarceration and behavior. And one of the things that I learned from working in these coalitions, and especially the experiences of visiting prisons, I was part of a coalition, Halt Solitary Confinement, and worked with an organization called the Correctional Association of New York for a year, where we had the power to go into prisons, interview individuals incarcerated about their experience being incarcerated, and monitor how the Department of Corrections is going about implementing their policies and procedures. And what we find is that while in prison, they're being re-traumatized, right? They're getting harder as opposed to more open, right? And one of the issues I really want to point to is solitary confinement. It's been proven to cause individuals to become psychotic within 2 to 3 weeks. And one of our big advocacy points was to advocate for the Mandela Rules, which is the international rules of solitary confinement, where you cannot keep an individual in solitary confinement for more than 14 or 15 days. New York State has not adopted the Mandela Rules. I don't think any state in the country has adopted the Mandela Rules, but the United Nations has, and every country follows it.
Interesting. That's a whole world that I personally do not know much about. Yeah. And I'd be curious, I know we've ran over a little bit of time, but for anyone who is still with us, do you have questions about maybe that topic specifically or anything else that Jeff has shared with us today? We'd love to hear from you all. Let's see if anyone has any questions. It was a lot. We talked about a lot of different things. A lot.
I hope I didn't go off the rails too much.
When I really love when people, you can just tell that they're really passionate about something and things will emerge. Conversations will go in different directions, and it's always interesting to see where they end up. Yeah. So if anything, no pressure, nothing comes to mind, you definitely will have opportunities to reach out to Jeff afterwards. Please do. Yeah, we'll post this video to the GAS platforms within about the next week or so. And we'll also tag Jeff and have contact information if you would like to continue any conversation. And I just want to thank you, Jeff, so much for being here today. This was a great conversation. I hope the first of many. And I look forward to seeing everyone next month.
Jenna, I hope this is the first of many conversations around these issues. There are glass can solve a lot of problems. Working with glass, communities, soft glass, hard glass, stained glass, a relationship with glass can solve or be the thing that opens the door enough to solve problems individually, family, organization, community, state. It can go on. A relationship with glass can be healing and problem solving in life.
Beautiful. What like a perfect way to end today. So thank you very much, Jeff.
Thanks, Jenna. Right. And everybody who was listening. Thank you.
Have a good night or day wherever you're located.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.